It was supposed to be a simple 7-day cruise through the Caribbean. Calm seas, gentle winds, 2,000 passengers looking forward to sunrises on open water, clinking cocktail glasses, and the kind of peace that only distance from land can bring. But 4 days in, something broke the rhythm. The Marina Queen was a luxury ship, not the flashiest vessel in the fleet, but solid, trusted. Launched in the late 90s, it was now a reliable choice for older travelers and honeymoon couples who wanted a quieter experience. And Captain Elias Hart, he was part of that reliability. Everyone said the same thing about him. He was steady, calm, always the first to greet the new crew and the last to leave the bridge. He had been with the cruise line for over 17 years, and Marina Queen had been under his command for the last 8. Not once had he missed a sailing. Not once had he logged an incident. Until July 13, 2007. It was a Thursday. Passengers recall that the day started like any other. Breakfast buffets on Deck 5, kids splashing in the pool, steel drums playing by the bar. There were no weather alerts, no engine failures, no security breaches, nothing. The Marina Queen was gliding along a clean arc toward the Caymans. At 2:15 p.m., the first officer went up to the bridge to deliver routine navigation checks, a task normally acknowledged by Captain Hart with a nod or a quiet, "Carry on." But that day, the bridge was empty. Not entirely, no. The systems were fine. Autopilot was engaged, charts were logged, nothing looked tampered with. But the captain, he wasn't there. Not in the captain's chair, not in the private charting station, not in the small kitchenette behind the console where he sometimes made his own coffee. Just gone. At first, it wasn't alarming. Hart was known to walk the ship during calm hours, checking decks, speaking with engines, ears, even sometimes visiting the kitchens unannounced. But when an hour passed with no sign of him, the first officer initiated a soft search. An internal page. No answer. They tried his quarters. Locked, but that wasn't unusual. At 4:30 p.m., the crew widened the search, quietly so as not to disturb guests. By 6 o'clock p.m., the announcement was made over the crew channel. All departments report if Captain Hart has been seen within the last 4 hours. Every reply came back the same. Negative. By nightfall, the entire ship was being combed, bow to stern. Every staff-only corridor, every dining area, even the lifeboats were counted, all present. The security room checked footage from every visible angle, especially the bridge corridor. But something strange stood out, or rather, something didn't. No one had seen Hart leave the bridge. At 1:47 p.m., a hallway camera caught him entering the bridge deck, coffee in hand, logbook under his arm. That was the last time any camera saw him. There was no footage of him exiting. Not by the main door, not through the engineer's hatch, not even down the exterior stairs to the captain's balcony. It was as if he had walked onto the bridge and disappeared. The crew remained professional, but beneath the surface, people were rattled. The senior engineer later told investigators, it wasn't just that he was missing, it was the silence that followed. Radios stayed quiet. He didn't call in, didn't leave a note. The man was a creature of habit. Something was off. They debated turning the ship around. But with no sign of foul play and no distress signal, corporate insisted the cruise continue, while an internal team coordinated a search protocol. Passengers remained unaware. On the outside, Marina Queen looked calm as ever. But beneath the decks, officers, engineers, janitors, every uniformed crew member was now walking the sluice. Each ship like it was hiding something. The next morning at sunrise, they unlocked Captain Hart's private quarters. Nothing unusual. His bed was made. Logbook closed neatly on his desk. Last entry was 2 days old. Shoes aligned, uniform pressed and hanging. Except one thing was missing. The bridge override key. It was a small brass device, no bigger than a car key, but it was deeply personal. Only the captain carried it. He used it for emergency reboots of navigation systems or to manually disengage automated locks. It was never supposed to leave his person during voyage, and now it was gone. The chief security officer took one look at the desk, turned to the first officer and said, "If he left that room with the key, then wherever he is, he went there intentionally." But no one knew where. Not yet. And the ship still had 3 days left at sea. By the second morning, the crew's unease had shifted from quiet concern to something closer to fear. Captain Elias Hart had now been missing for over 40 hours. Still no message, no call, no signs of distress, and most disturbingly, no explanation. The ship's command had formally passed to First Officer Tomas Hale, a 34-year-old with experience, but nowhere near Hart's quiet authority. He wasn't nervous, but people could tell. He didn't wear the chair the same way Hart had, not yet. Behind closed doors, Hale was pushing for answers. He met with the ship's chief security officer, Rene Alvarez, in the bridge conference room early that morning. Alvarez was direct. "You're not going to like this," he said. "We checked the escape hatches on decks 1 through 3. They're all sealed. None opened in the last 72 hours. "And the lifeboats?" Hale asked. "Counted. All 16 accounted for, not a single deployment." Which meant if Captain Hart had left the ship, he didn't use the standard exits. And if he hadn't left, then he was still somewhere on board. But that idea was worse. They rechecked his room, this time more carefully. No fingerprint tampering, no evidence of struggle. No unauthorized crew access. Still, the bridge override key was missing. The company sent digital override requests from headquarters, but they were denied. The system was still reading the key as active. That meant it was on the ship. Somewhere. Midday, Officer Hale made the difficult decision to inform the ship's head of guest relations. A small number of passengers, mostly near the upper bridge deck, had begun to whisper about the missing captain. Rather than let rumors grow wild, Hale asked for controlled messaging. The passengers were told, "Captain Hart has taken temporary medical leave for personal health concerns. First Officer Hale will be assuming bridge command for the remainder of the voyage." That calmed most people, but not the crew, because they knew something else, something the passengers didn't. 2 other strange things had happened the same day Hart disappeared. The first was a brief system error in the engine control logs. At 1:58 p.m., 11 minutes after Hart was last seen entering the bridge, the ship's main diagnostic system registered a manual override ping coming from the aft systems console, a locked terminal used only during reroutes or mechanical audits. It lasted 4 seconds, then it disappeared, logged, but never explained. No crew member admitted to being near the terminal. Security footage showed nothing. The room's camera, oddly, had gone black exactly 1 minute before the override ping, and came back online exactly 1 minute after. A coincidence? Maybe. But Alvarez didn't believe in those. The second incident was even smaller, but weirder. A steward working late on Deck B near the laundry shaft claimed he heard something, metal dragging. A door slam, then footsteps, slow and uneven, somewhere near the crew access stairs to the lower maintenance deck. He thought nothing of it at the time. That level was full of weird clanks and echoes. But now, with Hart gone? The steward wasn't so sure. "I remember thinking it sounded like someone walking in wet boots," he later said. "Like they'd come up from somewhere no one should be." They searched the lower decks next. Bulkhead doors, storage compartments, fuel pipe access, all logged, all sealed. Until they got to the lower maintenance corridor, a section of the ship that hadn't been opened since the last dry dock. The problem? The door lock had been accessed once within the last 72 hours. The logs showed a successful manual override using an active captain-level clearance, but no one had assigned that clearance, and only one item could activate that lock: the bridge override key. The crew didn't enter yet. They didn't tell passengers. They waited. Because the ship would dock in Miami in less than 36 hours, and if something was down there, no one wanted to face it in the middle of the sea. They secured the door with an external seal and put a camera on it. All night they watched the monitor. Nothing moved. No sound. No light. Just steel and shadows. But somewhere in that quiet, pressurized belly of the ship, the key still waited. and whatever it unlocked hadn't been seen in daylight for years. The ship's corridors felt tighter the next morning, not physically, but atmospherically. Even though the cruise was still running on schedule, guests had begun to notice strange gaps in routine. No morning update from the captain, no visible walkthroughs by senior staff, and the bridge, normally a symbol of calm leadership, remained unseen, tucked behind thick glass and drawn shades. Rumors spread. One man swore he saw a code yellow message on a steward's walkie. A couple from St. Paul claimed they heard shouting in a crew-only hallway, and a retired naval officer drinking at the Deck 7 lounge simply muttered, "Something's not right with the crew. They look like they've already seen something." Below, near the service corridors, the crew held their breath for another reason. The lower maintenance deck, sealed for years, hadn't been designed for daily operations. It was a relic from older layouts, a kind of mechanical sublevel full of legacy equipment, backup storage tanks, and cable routing. Most junior crew had never even been there. But now it had become the center of the ship's quiet panic. They couldn't open it yet, not until Miami. But Alvarez had stationed 2 crew near the hatch full-time, in case anyone attempted to access it. No one did. But on the camera, something flickered. At 2:41 a.m., for precisely 5 seconds, the live security feed outside the sealed hatch glitched. It wasn't a full blackout, more like a distortion. The camera jittered, warped, then resumed. Alvarez ordered a playback. He zoomed in on the static blur. Something was there, a faint silhouette at the edge of the frame, not close enough to identify, but clearly human-shaped. No one on duty had passed that hallway, and no keycard was scanned at the door. The motion sensor inside the maintenance deck? Inactive. Whatever it was, it had stopped just outside, then vanished. Officer Hale was running out of explanations. He met Alvarez privately that morning in the portside crew mess, away from the bridge. "This makes no sense," he said. "There's no ventilation path, no alternate entry point down there. And if that's someone from our crew, they're not logging anything." Alvarez didn't answer at first. He just looked down at the schematics he'd been reviewing all night. Then he tapped a point near the bottom left corner. "This section here, auxiliary tank corridor, it connects directly to the old coolant bypass channels." "And?" Hale asked. "Those channels lead into the base of the lower maintenance deck. You're saying someone could have crawled in?" Alvarez nodded. "Someone small, determined, or desperate." Later that day, a maintenance technician made a strange discovery. He'd been doing standard circuit checks on Deck 2, nowhere near the sealed corridor. But when he opened one of the electrical access hatches, tucked behind a rusting storage panel, he found something wedged inside the narrow crawl space behind the wiring, a black cloth object carefully wrapped. He called Alvarez immediately. Inside the cloth was a captain's field log notepad, the kind Hart used only when not at the bridge. The pages were warped with heat, possibly water damage, but a few entries were still visible. The last one was dated July 12th, the night before he vanished. Just one sentence, written in strong block letters. "I've seen something in the service hall that shouldn't be there." That changed everything. Now they had proof. Hart had seen something enough to make him start logging off bridge, something serious enough that he didn't record it digitally, and something close enough that it drove him to explore the lower decks, override key in hand. But what? There were no signs of sabotage, no strange passengers, no technical anomalies, apart from the one that no one wanted to talk about. The manual override ping. That had originated just minutes after Hart disappeared, from deep inside the ship, and now a part of his own logbook, damaged, hidden, was found in a panel nowhere near the bridge. By evening, a pattern had begun to form. One of the kitchen porters, a quiet man named Luis, told a supervisor he wouldn't return to duty near the aft stairwells. "I heard breathing," he said, "behind the steel wall, deep, like someone stuck between pipes. I told myself it was air pressure, but it didn't feel mechanical." They gave him light duty on Deck 3 after that. That night, Officer Hale made a decision. When the ship docked in Miami, he would immediately request federal boarding. He wanted U.S. maritime authorities to be present before the hatch to the lower maintenance deck was breached. It wasn't protocol, but none of this was, and part of him was starting to think this wasn't just about a missing captain anymore. On the final night at sea, the crew gathered silently near the sealed door one last time. The ship's engines rumbled beneath their feet. The hallway was lit only by a single overhead fixture, flickering occasionally. Nobody spoke, and behind that steel door, somewhere below the fuel lines and pipe walls, the bridge override key still remained unaccounted for. Waiting. At precisely 9:05 a.m., 4 hours after docking in Miami, 2 agents from the U.S. Coast Guard boarded the Marina Queen. They were dressed in plain navy blue uniforms with federal clearance tags. Their faces were unreadable. One of them, a quiet man named Ramsey, carried a folded file marked simply, Internal Incident 0713H. They were escorted directly to the bridge. First Officer Hale stood beside Alvarez, both of them tight-jawed and sleep-deprived. The night before had been long, watching, waiting, guarding that cold metal door on the lower deck. They hadn't told any of the passengers what was happening. They hadn't even informed corporate of the latest logbook discovery. Some things needed to be kept quiet until they were certain. "When did you last confirm physical presence of the captain?" one agent asked. "July 13th, 1:47 p.m., Hale replied. "Bridge camera confirmed entry. No record of exit." "Any reason to believe he went overboard?" Alvarez stepped in. "No breach. No unlocked hatches. All escape points confirmed. No lifeboat access. Nothing on radar. Nothing on external cams." Ramsey took a moment, then slowly said, "Then we begin below." By noon, the passengers had disembarked. Families wheeling suitcases, kids wearing cruise-branded sun hats, oblivious to the investigation happening 2 decks beneath where they danced, laughed, and toasted champagne. The ship was quiet now, a shell of what it had been. The hallway, leading to the lower maintenance deck, was still taped off, 2 silent guards standing at either side. Hale, Alvarez, and the 2 federal agents approached the sealed door with gloves, flashlights, and 3 sets of radio backup. They keyed in the lock code. The panel blinked. Access denied. Alvarez's heart dropped. The code was correct. He tried again. Same result. Then Ramsey stepped forward. He took a small black device from his coat. It was shaped like a palm-sized brick, a clearance override tool. He plugged it into the access port. The screen blinked once, then flashed green. Clunk. The old steel lock hissed and released. The door creaked open. The smell hit them first. Not rot, not mold, but a dense, oily staleness, like rust, diesel, and time all layered into the air. The corridor beyond was narrow and sloped downward, lit by flickering yellow emergency lights. No main bulbs were working. This level hadn't been touched in years. Metal pipes crisscrossed above their heads, some dripping slow moisture into floor drains. The walls were sweating, and the silence was unnatural, not a quiet, but an absence of any sound at all, like the ship itself was holding its breath. They moved carefully, boots echoing off the narrow passage. 10 paces in, a small red LED light blinked on a control panel to the left. Ramsey stopped. "There's still power to this room," he whispered. "Minimal circuit draw, maybe a sensor." Or something else. The corridor turned left, then dipped lower. The team passed a rusting bulkhead door half-welded shut. Then another, marked Auxiliary Fuel Processing, and finally came to a grated steel platform overlooking a lower subsection. A grated stairwell led down. Alvarez spotted it first. There, near the base of the stairwell, lying against a corroded steel tank, was a small metal toolbox, closed. Oil stains surrounded it like dried shadows. Next to it, neatly folded, the captain's jacket. And not just any jacket. This was the field-issued black bridge coat, worn only during personally piloted departure or MOUs. Newell override operations, the kind of jacket Hart hadn't needed to wear in years. Ramsey slowly stepped down. He knelt, opened the toolbox. Inside, wrapped in a faded rag, lay the bridge override key, intact, undamaged. But next to it, a torn scrap of paper, folded once. They opened it. One sentence. I shut it down, but I don't think it stopped. Silence. For a long time no one moved, no one spoke. Then Hale quietly asked, "Shut what down?" Ramsey didn't answer. He just stared at the words. The investigation team moved carefully now, photographing everything, scanning the walls for markings, checking for fingerprints. Nothing seemed disturbed, nothing broken or forced. And yet, just before leaving the room, Alvarez noticed something in the far corner, behind the diesel-lined junction box. Something burned. He stepped closer, pulled back the loose metal mesh. It was a partially charred clipboard, melted along one side but legible. It held engine test data logs, but the last line stood out. Unauthorized ping, source, internal relay, manual, no ID. And a small signature beneath it, faint, nearly washed out, E. Hart. They had found the captain's last known location, his personal override key, his jacket, and 3 haunting clues, a written message, a logged engine anomaly, and a key that only he could have used, but no body, no blood, no DNA, and no logical reason why he would descend into the lower maintenance deck alone, unless something up top had driven him there. As the agent sealed the area, Ramsey looked back one last time at the toolbox. He didn't say it out loud, but something about the way the key had been left, not dropped but placed, told him the captain hadn't fled. He had made a decision. The question was, why, and what had he been trying to stop? They sealed the lower maintenance deck by 3 o'clock p.m. The federal agent logged every item recovered, the bridge override key, the jacket, the burned clipboard, and the small handwritten note. All were sent for analysis. But they already knew there were no fingerprints besides Hart's, no blood, no fibers, no sign of struggle. Captain Elias Hart had gone down there on his own and left something behind, but not himself. By evening, Marina Queen was moored for inspection. Crew began their final debriefs, relieved passengers filed complaints about delays, and company reps scrambled to contain the story. But in the background, something else was happening. A quiet wave of doubt had begun to spread among the staff, especially among those who'd been aboard long enough to remember the captain's behavior over the last few weeks. It started with the communications officer. Her name was Dana Kearns, a 29-year-old who had worked 6 cruises under Hart's command, reliable, sharp, quiet. She hadn't spoken up earlier because, as she put it, it felt too weird to say out loud. But now, with the discovery of the captain's jacket and override key, she requested a private meeting with Alvarez. There was something off about him, she said. 2 nights before he disappeared. Define off, Alvarez asked. Dana hesitated, then finally said, he asked me how long the internal comms had been logging without manual resets. Okay, Alvarez said, that's a routine query. But not at 3:30 in the morning, and not when he's standing barefoot outside the equipment room, staring at the wall like he's listening to something on the other side. It wasn't the only report. The night engineer, a man named Marco, also stepped forward. He'd seen Hart 3 nights before the disappearance, sitting on one of the cargo lift stairwells, alone, with no radio, no clipboard, and no expression, just sitting. I said, "Everything all right, Captain?" He looked at me and said, "Do you ever think a ship remembers what it carries?" Then he walked away. Alvarez began collecting these fragments like breadcrumbs. A note that Seika had, I shut it down. A captain walking barefoot in comms corridors. A question about whether ships remember. The unauthorized system ping. And then, a missing minute. It was Ramsey, the Coast Guard agent, who noticed it. He had been cross-checking data between the bridge log and the automated backup server that monitored system pings, hallway movements, and access logs. The system was old, but it kept redundancy files stored offline. There, tucked in a corrupted folder marked July 13 SIS, was a short 31-second voice clip recorded unintentionally by the navigation system. It wasn't labeled. It wasn't supposed to exist. It had no timestamp, but the metadata placed it at 1:52 p.m., 5 minutes after Hart entered the bridge. Ramsey played it through a secured speaker in the bridge command center. The room filled with static, then footsteps, slow, deliberate. Then something scraped across a surface, metal on metal. Then silence. And then, very faintly, a voice. Not a scream, not panic, just resigned. No one will believe it unless it's gone. Then static again. End of recording. The team sat in silence for a full minute. Finally, Alvarez spoke. That was Hart. Hale nodded. And he was talking about something being removed or hidden. Ramsey just stared at the speaker. No, he was talking about himself. Outside, Miami sunlight warmed the deck of the Marina Queen. Tourists passed by without a glance. The cruise line had sent new staff to prepare for the next journey. PR teams issued statements. Media outlets were told it was a non-criminal disappearance of an experienced officer. But below deck, among those who had walked the narrow halls and heard the things Hart left behind, no one was calling it an accident anymore. Something had been building, and someone, the captain, had tried to shut it down. That night, in the crew barracks, Dana Kearns finally opened her personal notebook. She'd scribbled something there weeks ago and forgotten about it, a phrase Hart had muttered one morning before going silent. She read it again now, by herself. They say steel bends under heat, but what about memory? She didn't sleep that night. 3 days after the Marina Queen was docked and cleared of passengers, a specialized mechanical crew arrived for routine post-incident inspection. The cruise line had no choice. With the captain still missing and federal agents involved, the ship couldn't resume service until every square inch below deck was signed off. The inspection team was contracted. Outsiders. No idea what had happened, just a checklist, a schedule, a job. But one of them found something that hadn't been logged. His name was Derek Sloan. 36, maritime technician. Good at his work, quiet, divorced last year, didn't like crowds. He was assigned to check the auxiliary coolant valves near the lower diesel pump bay, just a routine pressure test. The access tunnel was tight, narrower than he liked. He had to remove his utility belt just to slide through one of the side channels that curved under the secondary maintenance grate. And that's when he saw it, a glint, almost invisible. Wedged behind a loose access pipe, stuffed in between insulation foam and an old rusted coupling, was a small black device, no larger than a deck of cards. Matte finish, smooth edges, no wires. It was not part of the ship's design. He called out for his supervisor. They took a photo, tagged it, logged coordinates, then carefully removed it. There were no manufacturer labels, no ports, and no power indicator, just a flat outer casing, and one thing etched into the surface as if scratched by hand, HF03. When Alvarez and Agent Ramsey saw the photos, they didn't speak for a long time. Ramsey requested immediate custody of the device, and within hours, a full scan was underway. Inside the object, they found a microtransceiver, a buffer chip, and a looped data archive. It was sent a bomb. It wasn't a tracker. It was a signal catcher. Ramsey called it what it was. It's a passive audio tap. Someone was listening. Alvarez stared at the schematics. Whoever placed this knew the ship, knew which corridor Hart would use, knew where he would go if he was looking for an internal system breach. But why audio? Hale asked. Ramsey looked grim, because maybe Hart heard something he wasn't supposed to. That night they re-scanned the ship's comms buffer. They pulled weeks of recordings from unused backups trying to see when the signal catcher might have started collecting data. And they found something. In one of the archived buffer files, from June 22nd, 21 days before Hart vanished, they heard a loop, a tiny pattern embedded inside a white noise segment. At first it sounded like hum, then static, then a whisper. Slowed down, enhanced, and cleaned through 5 filters. A fragment came through. Control isn't yours. No voice was attached, no name, no origin. Just a barely audible warning buried in noise, and it matched the range of the HF-03 device, which meant someone or something on the ship had been transmitting weeks before the captain went missing. Ramsey didn't say it out loud, but he no longer believed Hart had just discovered something. He believed Hart had been watching it, tracking it, studying it, long before anyone else noticed. And whatever it was, he'd tried to bury it, but someone else had been listening all along. Hale returned to the captain's quarters the next morning. Not for the logs, not for the radio, but for the bookshelf. Hart had kept a small collection of old sea journals, manuals, and maritime memoirs. Hale didn't know why, but he suddenly felt like something might be hiding where Hart knew no one else would look. Third shelf. Behind an outdated radar repair guide, a slim, hand-bound notebook. Inside, only 12 pages. Every single one had numbers, sequences, times, locations, system activity, and one page circled in red ink. Dated July 12th. 01:46 p.m. Audible movement below subdeck, no mechanical output. 01:48 p.m. 3D dip in lateral stabilizers. 01:50 p.m. Crew hallway monitor, 5 flickered, no error log. 01:52 p.m. Sound behind the comms wall, something breathing. 01:54 p.m. Bridge key in pocket, proceeding below. That was the last entry. No goodbyes, no fear, no drama, just intent. And 5 minutes later he was gone. Alvarez placed the notebook down gently. He knew something was down there, and he went alone. Ramsey nodded, and left us everything but the thing he faced. But they were wrong. Because the last thing, the final piece, hadn't been found yet. Not until a janitor, 4 days later, was asked to clean the external ventilation chamber near the diesel coil release valve. There, lodged in the grill, was a boot print. Captain's regulation boot, melted, warped, and facing the wrong way. The boot print was impossible to ignore. Warped at the edges, partially melted by heat, and unmistakably part of the captain's standard-issue uniform, it had no business being where it was, wedged into the outer vent grill of a diesel coil chamber, facing inward, almost like he had been dragged, feet first, toward the wall. But that wasn't the part that chilled Alvarez the most. It was how clean the area around it was. No smudges, no soot, just that single mark as if placed carefully, as if someone wanted it to be found. By now most of the crew had been sent home. The ship was docked and powered down. Only a skeleton team remained: investigators, engineers, federal agents. Yet even with the vessel at rest, the atmosphere had only grown heavier. Officer Hale stood in the upper bridge cabin, reviewing a cross-linked timeline of every known action the captain had taken in his final 48 hours, movement logs, entry scans, door access codes, but something didn't add up. He walked it into the bridge at 1:47, Hale murmured to himself, overrode security at 1:51, and was logged entering the maintenance deck corridor by 1:57. But what happened between 1:47 and 1:51? He checked again. 4 full minutes unaccounted for. No footsteps, no comms, no system changes, except a manual unlock on the forward observation room, a place nobody had been in for years. Alvarez went down to check. The forward observation chamber was sealed, not because of hazard, but because of redundancy. It had been closed off after new tech was installed 3 years ago. No reason to use it anymore. But now, standing in front of the narrow steel door, Alvarez felt it. Cold. Not just temperature. An absence. Like something had pressed against the space and then vanished. He unlocked the chamber. It opened with a groan. Inside, darkness. Dust. And one chair facing the large round window at the front of the ship. It looked out into the sea, but there was no sea now. Just the interior of the port. Still, Alvarez walked in, slowly, On the far console, partially obscured by grime, was an old intercom handset, not wired into the modern system, just legacy hardware. But the light on it? Green. It was live. He picked it up. Silence. Then, barely, he heard something. Not a word, not a whisper, just breathing, not his own, slow, hollow, as if coming through waterlogged lungs. Then a crackle, and the sound stopped. The green light flicked off. Alvarez dropped the receiver. He backed away, heart pounding, trying to convince himself that it was just bleed-in from an old radio loop, just residual current, just a ship remembering its own echoes. But deep down, he knew, that line hadn't been active for years. Elsewhere, in the federal control van, Agent Ramsey was staring at a single line of code extracted from the HFO3 device found behind the OLANT pipe. It wasn't part of the audio signal. It wasn't part of the device's architecture. It was just text, almost like a message buried inside the chip. The code translated into plain words. Subroutine, monitor cycle breach. If isolated, relay to memory hold. Memory hold? Ramsey whispered. He searched the phrase. Nothing came up in maritime manuals. Nothing in cruise operation logs. Until he checked one final place. An old ship AI architecture manual from 10 years ago, the one used during the early testing of smart stabilizing cruise systems. There, in a footnote, memory hold, a contained sublayer where self-learning systems retain discarded data not meant for real-time processing, also known by engineers as the ghost deck. Hart had called it weeks before. Do ships remember what they carry? Now Ramsey understood. He hadn't been poetic. He'd been literal. The Marina Queen's system had been collecting something. Anomalies, voice signals, looped code, unauthorized pings, and dumping them somewhere hidden. Somewhere Hart had found. And when he found it, he went in alone. They reconvened that night. Ramsey, Hale, Alvarez. 3 men sitting in the captain's dark office, papers strewn across the desk, artifacts laid out before them, the field log, the burned clipboard, the scratched black device, the boot print photo, the handwritten note. All of it painting a single picture. Hart had discovered an echo inside the ship. A digital cavity where abandoned data had accumulated, not erased, not deleted, just dumped, forgotten. And somewhere along the way, that memory had learned to listen. It wasn't AI, it wasn't haunting, it wasn't sabotage. It was worse. It was something they didn't have a name for. And he had gone in to shut it down. Alone. Ramsey said it first. He left the key, not because he wanted us to follow, but because whatever was in there can only be unlocked once, and he already did. But still, there was one final question left. Why leave the key where it could be found? Why not toss it, destroy it? Why tuck it in a toolbox? Unless Hart wasn't trying to lock something, he was trying to mark the point where he had entered, and something else might have come back out. The bridge override key was returned to the case file, sealed, logged, marked as Evidence 7. The Marina Queen was eventually cleared for future service, after 3 federal reviews, 5 system sweeps, and an internal software patch to eliminate any data retention anomalies. But no one ever re-entered the lower maintenance deck, not even the engineers. The door was welded shut, marked inactive, never explained to future captains. Just another part of the ship no longer mapped. In the official record, Captain Elias Hart was declared lost at sea, presumed dead. No foul play, no external interference, no signs of criminal activity. Case closed. But those who were there, the ones who walked the corridors that night, who saw the captain's handwriting, heard the distorted breathing on dead comms, and watched the security footage frame by frame, they never called it a loss. They called it a containment. A month later, long after the ship had left port again and the headlines had faded, A mechanic doing routine ventilation cleanup on another deck, lower aft ventilation line, discovered something odd. It wasn't large, just a strip of plastic, blackened and warped. Looked like debris at first. But he was a cautious man. He cleaned it, held it up to the light, etched into the corner, barely visible under layers of soot. Heart E. It wasn't a tag. It was an ID chip, the kind crew wore in their security badges, sealed inside plastic, the kind that triggered motion sensors and door logs, the kind Hart had on him the day he vanished. But there was one problem. This particular ventilation shaft, it didn't connect to the lower maintenance deck. It connected to the main dining level, far above, which meant sometime after Hart vanished, his ID moved. Ramsey was informed. He personally inspected the site. No break-ins, no system breach, no logged access. But on the security monitor near the ventilation panel, the log showed a 7-second blackout exactly 24 hours after Hart's presumed disappearance. 7 seconds, no power surge, no camera failure, just blank, and then normal again. No one could explain it. The crew wanted to dismiss it. The company needed to, so they did. But Ramsey couldn't stop thinking about what Alvarez had said that night in the captain's office. He didn't lock something in. He left the key in case it got out. 3 months passed. Fall arrived. The ship sailed again. New passengers, new staff. But something strange began to happen. One steward, new, hired just 2 weeks prior, reported hearing soft static coming from the old comms wall outside the observation deck. He was laughed off. Another claimed she saw a door open on its own in the crew corridor, one welded shut. Still another said they found fingerprints on the inside of the sealed bridge door, prints too smudged to match. Every report was dismissed, labeled imagination, lack of sleep, stress, but quietly, Alvarez sent Ramsey one final message. A voice memo, only 5 words. The ship isn't empty anymore. In Miami, a few miles inland, a woman named Claire Hart received a small brown envelope. No return address, no postage mark. Inside, a simple thumb drive. No note. She inserted it. One audio file. She played it. At first, nothing. Then breathing, slow, measured, familiar, and then, "Claire, keep the lighthouse on." She dropped the drive, and she wept. The next morning, she drove to the marina where they had first launched the Marina Queen 15 years ago, when Elias Hart had just been promoted. The lighthouse there had long since been decommissioned, the bulb removed, the panel rusted. She stood by the fence. For a moment, she swore she saw a shadow in the upper window, just standing. Then it was gone. The official story says Captain Hart disappeared at sea. The logs say he was last seen near the bridge. The evidence says he died below deck. But what none of them say is who or what came back up that ladder. The ship was quiet again. For all its size, its decks, its hallways, and steel bones, there was something about an empty cruise ship that felt smaller, tighter, like a breath being held. 1 week after the last passenger disembarked, Officer Thomas Hale returned alone to perform a final walkthrough before full crew rotation resumed. Not because he was ordered to, but because he needed to. He walked through the upper corridors, past sealed doors and silent lounges, past the captain's quarters, now locked indefinitely, and finally down the forward staircase to the observation deck. It hadn't been reopened. No repairs were scheduled. But something about that room lingered in Hale's thoughts. The way the light used to hit the glass, the way the sea stretched wide beyond it, the way Hart used to stand there wordless. When Hale opened the door, a gust of dry air moved past him. Dust floated in the beam of his flashlight. The old chair still sat near the glass. No one had touched it. He stepped inside, waited, then turned and sat. Just for a moment. What would drive a man like Captain Hart to walk into darkness without telling anyone? Was it duty, fear, or something stranger, some instinct only he could feel? There had been no final message, no confession, no grand moment of clarity, just fragments, a scattered notebook, A single boot print, a voice on a static line. And that message, "Keep the lighthouse on." Claire Hart hadn't spoken to press since the disappearance. She refused interviews, avoided reporters, declined all offers from publishers and media producers. But she did one thing. A week after receiving the anonymous thumb drive, she made a private donation to the Marina Queen Historical Registry, enough to restore the ship's original nameplate, long buried in storage. She requested no ceremony, no plaque. Just that the name be returned to the bow in its original lettering. Elias Hart, Commanding Officer, 2006 to 2023. No one objected. The crew didn't forget his name. The ship didn't either. Months passed. Then came the letter. Unmarked envelope. Inside, a printed photo. A shot of the observation window, taken from inside the room. Fogged glass, morning light. But in the bottom right reflection, faint, almost invisible, was a figure, standing just beyond the glass. Tall, dark, head turned slightly. A trick of light, or something looking back. There was no caption, no note, just one word written in fine pen at the bottom. Still here. Agent Ramsey never confirmed receiving it, but 2 days later he requested to be reassigned to land-based operations. He never boarded another ship again. In time, the Marina Queen returned to service. New guests, new destinations, new name, Marina Solstice. But some of the old crew stayed on, and every so often a new steward or tech would whisper something strange, a cold draft where there shouldn't be, an intercom light flickering with no one speaking, an old melody heard humming through the lower pipework. No source found. The kind of things cruise lines don't record. The kind of things sailors just call the echo. On a quiet night, years later, Thomas Hale sat in his apartment above the harbor. He had long since moved ashore, taught navigation theory, ran training courses, watched younger men and women take the helm. But one night, he pulled out Hart's old log, a copy Alvarez had given him the week the case was closed. He flipped to the final page. Not the system notes, not the maintenance logs, just a torn corner scrawled hastily in red ink. A quote from some forgotten naval text. "The sea ever forgets. It only waits." Hale stared at it, closed the notebook. Then, without really thinking, he turned off the light, and for a moment just listened. Outside, waves lapped quietly against the dock, and somewhere, far across the water, the sound of a foghorn cut through the night, long, slow, and deep. But no ships were scheduled that night. None at all.